Welcome to Party Girl Interrupted, the podcast about nightlife, identity, ambition, and the journey from party to purpose. I'm your host, Kathy Wong. So, for most of my 20s, I built a life inside rooms designed to be loud: velvet ropes, flashing lights, names on lists, VIP. From the outside, it looked like power, and sometimes it was. But what people don't talk about is what happens after, when the music stops, when you leave the party, when you're alone in your apartment at 3 a.m. and it's just you, and it's quiet. Because one of the strangest feelings in the world is being surrounded by hundreds of people and still feeling completely alone. Nightlife is full of that. I'm Kathy. I'm a born and raised New Yorker. I grew up in Chinatown, New York, daughter of a Colombian mother and a Chinese father. Raised in a loud house, raised in a loud city. I've always had this big, intense energy, a little bit too much. Too talkative, too curious, too emotional. I was the kid in school who was always talking. My report cards always said the same thing. Kathy is a great student, but she needs to stop talking to the other kids during class. And I never did. I finished my homework early and then start talking to everyone else, asking what they were doing. I've always just been this natural storyteller, which apparently was a little too much. For a long time, that felt like something I had to manage. Like I had to tone it down depending on where I was. And then I found nightlife. And suddenly, everything that felt like too much actually worked. The energy, the chaos, the stimulation, it matched me. I wasn't too much. I was magnetic. I was connected. I was charming. And for the first time, I wasn't really trying to fit in. I just did. Nightlife didn't just give me a place to go. It gave me an identity that made sense. I became the person who knew where everything was happening, the person who knew everyone, the person who always had access, the ultimate party girl. And for a long time, it felt incredible. And the funny thing is how I got into nightlife, because it wasn't some big plan. It just kind of happened. I started going out more, meeting people, getting pulled into different social circles. Then suddenly I was around club owners, promoters, DJs, people who just lived in that world. And once you're in it, you're in it. It's a whole ecosystem. There's the promoters working the room, the DJs controlling the energy, the tables, the spenders, the bottles, the whole thing. Everyone has a role. And the nights all start to feel the same, but also completely different at the same time. Like you're going to a different place, but it's the same music, the same people, the same energy, just recycled in a new room. But when you're inside it, it doesn't feel repetitive. It feels exciting. It feels like something is always about to happen. And the energy is addictive. There's music, lights, people everywhere. You're talking, you're moving, you're laughing, you're dancing, constantly stimulated. You don't really have time to think. And for me, that worked. It matched my energy perfectly. But somewhere along the way, fun slowly turned into escape. Connection became performance, and success stopped feeling like success. I was so exhausted, anxious all the time, high functioning, but not actually happy. And eventually, everything I thought I had built started to crack. And I thought that moment was the interruption, but it wasn't. The first real interruption came when I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So we were dining at Catch one night, and I was introduced to a head doctor or a brain doctor who had a practice on Park Avenue, and essentially invited me in to do his like famous, tests and basically run every single test through your body, your brain, like MRIs, hearing tests, brain scans, CAT scans, blood tests, blood panels, everything. And it was a 10-hour endeavor, which I did not know when I signed up for that. And basically spent the whole day in his office running every single test possible. And went home the next day, and a couple of days was called back into the office. And, I had gone in thinking like, I'm young, I'm in my 20s, I probably drink more than most, obviously, but healthy, work out all the time. And was just expecting like a vitamin D deficiency diagnosis, because everybody in New York has a vitamin D deficiency. And got in, and I just remember sitting in front of him. He had these big tortoiseshell glasses, and he had all these tchotchkes and degrees and everything that I was just, ADDing on behind him. And he starts reading everything off. I'm healthy, BMI is good, all these things are fine. And then he says, and you have bipolar disorder, bipolar 2. And everything stopped. The noise stopped, like time stopped. And I'm just looking at him. And the strangest thing is that I remember him peering over his glasses and looking at me and saying, "Oh, you didn't know? Like, how would I know that?" I never, ever, ever, ever thought that I would have a mental illness or have some type of diagnosis like that. But at the same time, the memory of opening drawers when I was growing up in our home and finding prescription bottles for my mother and I remember looking up some of these prescriptions, but not really understanding what I was reading because it was saying things like manic depression or psychiatric and words I just didn't understand at the time. So I kind of like had the realization. I was like, this is from my mother. And I voiced that. And he's like, yes, that usually is the case. That it usually is through the maternal side. And just time just stopped. And that was a true interruption in that like I had to take a really good long look at myself. And the thing is, even as he said it, the diagnosis, it didn't even fully land right away. It was like I heard it, but I didn't feel it yet. Like, okay, that's information, but it didn't change how I was living. I mean, I went right back into my life. I was still working in nightlife, still living my best life. I started taking medication. I started going to therapy, but I was still living the same life. That diagnosis, it planted a seed, but the real interruption came later. It would take moving halfway across the world, a global pandemic, a relationship that tore me open, and more than a few ego deaths before I finally let the interruption change me. When my life finally slowed down enough for me to actually look at it, I started doing something I had never really done before. I started trying to heal. Not just push forward, not just perform, not just distract myself with another thing, another party, another person, another room full of noise. Actually sit with myself. And that's when I found breathwork. At first, it was something I was just curious about. Another tool, another practice, another experiment. But pretty quickly, it became something deeper. It forced me to slow down, to sit with things I had spent years avoiding. And I didn't fully understand it at the time, but something was starting to shift. And I think that's really why I wanted to start this podcast. This podcast isn't a takedown of nightlife. It's not a scandal expose, and it's definitely not I used to party and now I'm healed story. It's about identity, ambition, mental health, addiction, and not just the substances, but to validation, attention, and intensity. It's about what happens when the persona you've built starts to feel really heavy, and you have to decide whether you're going to keep performing or evolve. And that's what this podcast is about. Each week, we'll talk about the real stories behind the lives people build and what happens when those lives stop working. I'll share my own experiences, and I'll be talking to people who've been in it and come out the other side. We're gonna talk about identity, ambition, mental health, sobriety, relationships, reinvention, power, what it takes to build something real after everything you thought mattered starts to fall apart. I started writing my book, Party Girl Interrupted, because I realized I wasn't the only one. So many of us build lives that look incredible from the outside, but internally, we're disconnected. This podcast is the long-form conversation version of that, the honest version, the version that happens after the party, the version where people begin moving from party to purpose. If you've ever outgrown a version of yourself but didn't know what comes next, if you've ever felt alone in a crowded room, if you've ever wondered, is this actually success or just noise? You're in the right place. This is Party Girl Interrupted, a journey from party to purpose. And this is just the beginning. Thanks for listening to Party Girl Interrupted. If this episode resonated with you, please follow the podcast and share it with someone who's also figuring out what comes after the party. And if you want more stories, updates, and behind the scenes, you can find everything linked in the show notes, including my website, partygirlinterrupted.com. I'll see you next week.